Scandal thrives where virtue withers, my dear confidant. Tonight, Hawksmere does not glitter with joy, but rattles with chains. The Lady Alianor, once defiant, now recites words as bitter as grave dirt upon her tongue. Her soul is bartered, her heart silenced, her fate bound in a gilded cage that promises safety yet reeks of captivity. The village square watches, the Holy Sister preaches, and Sir Roland plays the part of savior while sharpening the knife of ownership. In this hour, wedding vows become shackles. Green samite gleams like poison ivy, and the bells toll not for celebration, but for damnation. Listen closely, for the gilded cage is more than a prison. It is a spectacle, a scandal, and a story that Hawksmere will never forget.
The words tasted like grave dirt, gritty and cold, coating her tongue with the essence of decay. Each syllable forced past her lips felt like shoveling earth onto a coffin. Eamon's coffin, her own soul's coffin. Standing once more in the village square, bathed in the weak, judgmental light of a dawn that offered no warmth, only exposure, Alianor felt hollowed out. Not empty, but scraped raw. A vessel filled only with ash and the echoing silence of betrayal. The crowd gathered again, a shifting mass of humanity pressed close, their murmurs a low, hostile hum vibrating against her skin. A physical manifestation of their collective suspicion and prurient hunger. Faces swam before her bleary eyes. The butcher's wife, eyes wide with scandalized delight. Old Ned Tanner, shaking his head with grim satisfaction. The miller's sons, exchanging coarse, knowing smirks. And presiding over this tribunal of the damned, Sister Margery sat rigidly beside the vacant shell of Lord Edmund, radiating sanctimonious vindication like cheap perfume. Her thin lips were pursed in a smile of pious triumph. Roland stood beside her, unnervingly close. His proximity was a cage in itself, the oppressive scent of cloves and raw power threatening to choke the breath from her lungs. His hand rested possessively on the small of her back, a silent branding iron, a constant reminder of ownership claimed and enforced. He had orchestrated this grotesque tableau with chilling efficiency. The penitent lady, frail and misguided, saved from the precipice of ruin and sin by the strong, benevolent Lord. His script was flawless, his direction impeccable. He was playwright, director, and lead actor in this tragedy where she played the broken puppet. Her voice, when she spoke the words he had dictated, was flat, devoid of inflection, a dead thing scraped from the ruins within her. It echoed strangely in the square, devoid of the fire that had once fueled her defiance. She confessed to hysteria, to being overwhelmed by grief for her father, a grief Roland had twisted into weakness, to the cunning manipulations of a dangerous outcast, Eamon Thorne. The name caught like a barbed hook in her throat, tearing flesh as she forced it out. She recanted her accusations against Sir Roland, painting them as delusions born of fear, confusion, and the insidious whispers of that very outlaw. She denounced Eamon, thief, rogue, malign influence, a poison purged from Hawksmere. Each syllable was a separate betrayal, a shard of glass ground into her own soul. She denied the wolf, his fierce loyalty, his wild spirit that had resonated with something buried deep within her. She denied his courage, facing down Roland's men, defending her, when the world offered only threats. She denied the fire he had seen smoldering beneath her grief, and kindled with his stark honesty. She spat on his memory, murdered a second time, more cruelly, by her own treacherous tongue. The only truth she clung to, the only flicker of defiance she allowed herself to manifest in this charade, was the absolute refusal to utter the word lover. Roland's eyes, cold and calculating, narrowed fractionally at the omission, a silent note taken, but he let it pass. The main performance, the grand recantation, served his immediate purpose perfectly. And so, Roland announced, his voice booming with magnanimous authority the moment her halting recitation ended, Seeing the Lady Alianor restored to her senses, humbled by this ordeal, and recognizing the peril her unfortunate misjudgment brought upon herself and upon all of Hawksmere, he paused, letting his gaze sweep the crowd, encompassing them in his narrative of rescue. I reaffirm my offer of protection, not merely as a distant overlord, but as husband. He turned to her with theatrical grace, taking her icy, unresisting hand in his. His grip was a vice, a promise of unyielding possession, and a silent threat of pain. The heavy signet ring on his finger dug into her knuckle. I pledge before you all, he declared, his voice resonating with false conviction, to restore order, security, and dignity to Hawksmere and to its lady. Do you accept this union, Lady Alianor, as a path to redemption and peace? The silence that followed was absolute, thick enough to choke on. The crowd held its collective breath, leaning forward, eyes wide, hanging on the final act of their morality play. Alianor looked down at their joined hands, his large, ringed fingers, strong and unscarred, dwarfed hers, pale and trembling, seeming to crush the very life from them. In her mind's eye, she saw Bess's tear-streaked face flash, heard her terrified whisper echoing in the memory of the cold tower. So much blood. She saw the phantom image of Eamon's broken body being dragged away like refuse into the forest gloom. She saw the cold, unforgiving stone walls of the tower room, her future stretching out as an endless corridor of imprisonment. She lifted her head slowly, deliberately, not to meet Roland's triumphant, predatory gaze, but to stare blankly over the heads of the gawping crowd, towards the brooding, mist-shrouded line of hills where Thorne's Hollow lay hidden, a sanctuary defiled, a grave unmarked. There lay the truth, buried, but not dead. I accept, she whispered. The words were dust, dry and lifeless, falling from her lips like the last embers of a fire extinguished. A roar went up, a jarring mixture of relief, sycophantic approval, and base excitement at the spectacle concluded. Roland raised their joined hands high, a conqueror displaying his hard-won prize, the embodiment of his victory over chaos and defiance. Sister Margery beamed, her sanctimony radiating palpable warmth. Lord Edmund, roused momentarily, mumbled something incoherent, a dribble of spittle tracing a path down his chin. The trap, meticulously laid and sprung, held its prey fast. The cage door, gilded with promises of security and status, clanged shut with finality. The days that followed were a grotesque parody of preparation, a frantic veneer of celebration plastered over the grim reality of occupation. Hawksmere Keep, long steeped in the quiet decay of grief and neglect, was suddenly overrun with Roland's ruthless efficiency. It felt less like a home, preparing for a wedding, and more like a fortress, being secured after a siege. His men, hard-faced, watchful, clad in de Mowbray's dark green livery, patrolled the walls and corridors with heavy tread, their presence a constant, oppressive reminder of who held power now. Their eyes followed Alianor, noting her movements, her silences. Guards stood at key junctions, not protecting her, but containing her. Carts rumbled across the drawbridge daily, bearing not just provisions, but symbols of Roland's wealth and control. Bolts of fine Flanders wool and shimmering samite, casks of expensive Gascon wine, sacks of rare spices that scented the air incongruously with clove and cinnamon, silver plate that gleamed coldly where simple pewter had sufficed. Alianor knew the source of this sudden largesse, the rich lead seams beneath Hawksmere land, the prize Roland coveted above all else, her inheritance now his dowry. The air buzzed with forced activity, servants scrubbing stones already worn smooth by generations, hangings being beaten free of dust, only to reveal their faded glory beneath. Cooks shouting orders in kitchens suddenly overflowing with unfamiliar scullions. It was a thin, brittle veneer of festivity laid over the underlying tension, like gilt paint slapped onto rotting wood. Alianor was swept along in this artificial current, a prized doll to be dressed, positioned, and displayed according to Roland's design. She was measured for her wedding gown in the solar, a room that had once been her mother's sanctuary, now violated by Roland's presence. The fabric chosen was not the simple, somber black wool of mourning she still felt bound to, but a costly expanse of deep green samite, the exact, rich color of a forest at dusk. The color of Roland's ambitions, she thought numbly. The color of poison ivy. Women she barely knew, hastily brought from de Mowbray or plucked from the more respectable village households, descended upon her. They fussed and chattered with brittle brightness, their voices like the chirping of trapped birds. Such a fortunate match, my lady. Sir Roland's generosity knows no bounds. The feast will be talked of for years. Green becomes you so, my dear. Brings out the fire in your hair. One matron simpered, oblivious or uncaring of the icy dread in Alianor's eyes. Their words washed over her, a meaningless cacophony. She endured their poking and prodding, the cool slide of measuring tapes against her shift, the rustle of expensive fabric in utter silence. Her body stood obediently, turned when directed, held still for pins. Her spirit retreated, locked away in the remembered cold and silence of the tower room, the only place where her thoughts felt remotely her own. The samite felt heavy, like chainmail, and just as constricting. Only Bess provided a fragile anchor to reality, a tether to a world where genuine feeling still existed. Roland, true to his word, as long as Alianor performed her role flawlessly, had allowed the maid to return to her service. But the Bess who returned was a shadow of the robust, sometimes sharp-tongued girl Alianor knew. She moved like a ghost herself, gliding silently, her face pale and drawn as parchment, shadows haunting her eyes, deeper and more permanent than those left by the lung fever. She flinched visibly at the sudden clang of a dropped pot in the kitchens, the sharp bark of Roland's orders echoing down the stone halls. Her gaze constantly darted towards doors and windows, perpetually braced for threat. She spoke little, her voice reduced to a raw whisper, but her touch when she helped Alianor dress or combed her hair was gentle, infinitely careful. Her silent presence in the room was a wordless testament to shared horror, a fragile island of understanding in a sea of hostile artifice. One afternoon, as Bess meticulously combed the snarls from Alianor's long, unbound hair, a task requiring patience Alianor no longer possessed, they found themselves momentarily alone in the commandeered solar. Sunlight, weak and watery, streamed through the narrow window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The forced cheer of the seamstresses was absent. The silence felt heavy, but safe. "The herbs, Bess?" Alianor asked softly, her voice barely disturbing the quiet. She kept her eyes fixed on the distorted reflection in a polished brass dish. "The ones for the tea?" A fragile thread of hope, of potential resistance however small. Bess's hand stilled instantly on the comb. A tremor ran through her. "Gone, milady," she whispered, the sound like dry leaves scraping stone. Her voice was raw, scraped thin by fear and suppressed tears. "The bundle. After they took you. Down to the village." She swallowed hard. "One of his men. Searched the still room. Found it. Took it." Her breath hitched. Said it was proof. Proof of dealings with the outlaw. Contraband. Fresh tears welled, spilling over, despite her obvious effort to hold them back, tracing glistening paths down her gaunt cheeks. "I'm sorry, milady. Truly. I tried. I thought to hide it, but they were everywhere, searching everything." Alianor closed her eyes. Of course, every trace of Eamon, every fragment of truth, every potential tool or solace had to be eradicated. The bitter willow bark, the calming chamomile, the pungent tansy, all gone, labeled as evidence of conspiracy. "It doesn't matter now," she said, forcing the lie past numb lips. It tasted like ashes. Nothing mattered but survival, and Bess's survival was inextricably linked to her own performance. She turned on the stool, catching Bess's cold, trembling hand in her own. "How are you?" "Truly?" She searched the maid's terrified eyes. Bess tried to summon a smile, but it was a frail, broken thing, crumbling before it fully formed. "Better, milady, truly." The cough. It's almost gone. But the abject terror lurking in the depths of her eyes, the way her gaze flickered constantly towards the closed door, belied her words utterly. She leaned closer, her whisper dropping to a threadbare strand of sound, barely audible. "Father Clement, I tried, milady. The night you were in the tower, after what I saw." Her body shuddered violently at the memory. "I crept out, once the guards changed, went to the priest's house, knocked and knocked." Alianor's grip tightened infinitesimally. A fragile hope, one she hadn't even consciously acknowledged clinging to, that Clement, stern but just, might intervene, might act on Bess's desperate message, might find some way to challenge Roland's narrative, withered and died in that instant. He wasn't there, Bess breathed. His housekeeper, Agnes, she opened the door just a crack, looked scared half to death herself, said Father Clement had been called away hours before, to the bedside of old Miller Cade, leagues away, down the valley. A sudden turn, she said. Bess's voice cracked. She took the message, said she'd give it to him when he returned. But milady, the way she looked, terrified, said Sir Roland's men had been asking after the father, too, watching. She shut the door quick. Bess shuddered again, wrapping her free arm around herself. "I barely got back unseen. Had to hide in the lee of the smithy when two of them passed, talking loud." The message, detailing Roland's brutality and Eamon's murder, was likely lost, intercepted, or would reach Clement far too late. The priest was absent, isolated, likely as helpless against Roland's encroaching power as they were. Roland's control was tightening like a noose, absolute and inescapable. The walls of Hawksmere felt thicker, the air heavier. The isolation deepened, turning claustrophobic, when Sister Margery arrived unannounced, ostensibly to offer spiritual guidance and comfort to the bride-to-be. Her presence was a cold fog settling over the solar, extinguishing the weak sunlight. She dismissed Bess with a curt, imperious nod that brooked no argument. The maid fled, casting one last fearful glance at Alianor, leaving her alone with the nun. Margery settled herself in the chair opposite Alianor, arranging her habit with precise movements. Her sharp, pale eyes missed nothing. The expensive but ill-fitting green samite draped over a frame too thin, the untouched plate of sweetmeats congealing on a side table, the profound deadness in Alianor's eyes that no amount of fine fabric could disguise. "A trying time, my child," Margery began, her voice dripping with a syrup of false sympathy that curdled in the air. "The path of righteousness is often steep and strewn with thorns." She steepled her fingers. "But God, in his inscrutable wisdom, works through such trials. He tests the mettle of our faith." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze like a physical probe. "Sir Roland, you must understand, is a stern instrument of the divine will. Stern, perhaps, but undoubtedly necessary. He will restore order to Hawksmere. He will protect you," her voice hardened infinitesimally, "from yourself, from your regrettable impulses." She paused, letting the sanctimonious pronouncement hang. Her eyes bored into Alianor's, searching for cracks, for any lingering spark of defiance. "These dark fancies," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper laced with menace. "These dangerous imaginings about the charcoal burner, they must be forgotten, utterly buried." Her gaze intensified, sharp as a dagger point. "Like the man himself, best to let the earth keep its secrets, and your tongue keep its silence." She was probing, testing Alianor's resolve, ensuring the recantation wasn't just public theater, but internal capitulation. Alianor met her eyes, a monumental effort of will. She forced her own gaze to remain blank, a smooth, unreflective surface, devoid of the revulsion and fury churning like acid within her. To show anything was to endanger Bess. "There's nothing to remember, sister," she said tonelessly, her voice devoid of inflection, echoing the words Roland demanded. "Only the confusion, the hysteria, as you yourself witnessed in the square." She recited the line like a well-learned catechism. Margery's smile was thin, tight, and utterly satisfied. It didn't reach her cold eyes. Indeed, a harsh lesson, but one well-learned, I trust. She leaned back, radiating pious authority. "Submission, my dear Alianor, is the true path to peace, to safety." She paused, letting the word safety hang in the air, thick and cloying, laced with unspoken threat. "Sir Roland," she continued, her tone turning brisk, pragmatic, "expects a dutiful wife. One who comprehends the weight of her position, the responsibilities it entails. And," her voice dropped again, becoming icy, "the consequences of continued waywardness, of ungrateful thoughts, of misplaced loyalties." The warning was clear, chilling. Margery wasn't just a gossip or a pious meddler. She was Roland's spiritual enforcer, his eyes and ears within the keep's intimate spaces, tasked with ensuring Alianor's complete and unquestioning capitulation, mind and soul. She rose, smoothing her habit with a finality that brooked no further discussion. "I shall pray fervently for your smooth transition into this blessed union, child. May you find the humility to accept God's plan with grace." Her departure left a palpable residue of poison in the air, a miasma of sanctified malice. Alianor was left alone. The silence, now oppressive, Margery's words echoing, submission, safety, consequences, the bars of her cage becoming ever more visible. The final suffocating blow fell on the eve of the wedding. A heavy sense of dread had settled over the keep, the forced gaiety of the preparations giving way to an unnatural quiet as darkness fell. Alianor sat by a guttering candle in her chamber, Bess helping her brush out her hair for the last time as an unmarried woman. The simple ritual felt like a farewell to a self that was already dead. The green samite gown hung ghost-like on a stand in the corner, a monstrous promise. The door opened without ceremony. Roland stood there, filling the frame. He wore a robe of deep crimson silk, an intimacy that felt like a profound violation in this space. Bess froze, the brush clattering from her hand onto the rush-strewn floor. Roland didn't even glance at her. His eyes, dark and predatory in the candlelight, were fixed solely on Alianor, sitting in her thin linen shift. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice low but carrying absolute authority. He flicked his wrist dismissively. Bess didn't hesitate. She cast one last, agonized look at Alianor, a silent plea and apology, then fled, slipping past Roland like a frightened mouse. The door clicked shut softly behind her, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. Roland turned the heavy iron key in the lock. The snick of the bolt sliding home was the sound of a cell door sealing. He didn't approach immediately. He stood there, just inside the door, surveying her in the dim light. His gaze traveled slowly, insolently, from her unbound hair down the length of her body, visible through the thin shift, lingering where the fabric clung. It was the assessing look of a man examining a newly acquired possession, checking for flaws, confirming his dominion. The candlelight cast sharp shadows on his face, making him look even more severe, more dangerous. Alianor stood up slowly, instinctively backing away, until the cold, unyielding stone wall pressed against her spine. She couldn't move further. She couldn't breathe. The air was thick with the scent of cloves and his overwhelming presence. "You acquitted yourself adequately today," he stated, his voice cool, analytical, devoid of any warmth or affection. The final fittings. The simpering gratitude expected by those fools from the village. He took a deliberate step closer, then another, closing the distance with the unhurried confidence of a predator certain of its prey. The villagers are appeased. The necessary illusion of order is restored. Another step. He was within arm's reach now. The candlelight flickered in his dark eyes. "Tomorrow," he said, the word dropping like a stone. "Before God and this credulous community, you become Lady de Mowbray, my wife." He paused, letting the title hang, heavy with implication. "My property, legally, irrevocably mine." Alianor remained frozen, pressed against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her palms were slick with cold sweat. She could see the fine weave of his silk robe, smell the cloying sweetness of cloves mixed with something harder, sharper beneath, the scent of iron and leather, of violence barely leashed. Roland stopped directly before her. He didn't reach for her face, didn't attempt a caress. Instead, his hand lifted slowly, deliberately. A single finger extended, it traced a path down the line of her throat, over the rapid, visible pulse beating frantically at its base. The touch was cold, impersonal, like ice against her skin. It continued down, over the hollow of her collarbone, down to the modest neckline of her shift. His finger paused there, a brand against her flesh. "The performance," he murmured, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, resonant in the small room. The public recantation, the meek acceptance. It served its purpose. It smoothed the path. But understand this, Alianor. His gaze locked onto hers, holding her captive. The cage you entered willingly at the square has only one master. His finger hooked under the thin strap of her shift, a small, intimate violation that screamed of the greater ones to come. "Tomorrow night," he continued, his breath suddenly warm and cloying against her ear as he leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous, intimate whisper that slithered into her soul. "You will learn the true meaning of wifely duty, and you will perform that duty without hesitation, without reserve, without a single whimper of resistance." His hooked finger tightened slightly on the strap. "Or," the word hissed out, laden with unspeakable promise, "your maid's usefulness will come to a very abrupt and final end. Do you comprehend me?" The threat hung in the air, colder and more terrifying than any naked blade. It wasn't just her body he claimed tomorrow. It was her soul, her last shred of autonomous will, purchased and held hostage with Bess's fragile life. The gilded cage revealed its true, rusted iron bars, a prison of absolute brutal control where resistance meant the death of the only person she had left. Alianor didn't speak. She couldn't force sound past the constriction in her throat, past the terror that turned her bones to water. She couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't bear the triumph glinting there. She merely gave the slightest, imperceptible nod, her eyes fixed blindly on a deep crack in the stone floor beside his boot. The world shrank to the icy point of his finger against her skin, the suffocating scent of cloves, and the yawning, absolute certainty of the horror that dawn would bring. The gilded cage was a lie. It was a oubliette. And the wedding bells, when they pealed, would not be a celebration, but the tolling chimes marking the irrevocable start of her life sentence. Silence descended, broken only by the frantic hammering of her own heart and the soft rustle of silk as Roland finally withdrew his hand, his presence lingering like a poison, long after he unlocked the door and left her alone in the suffocating dark.
Ah, my dearest confidant, the crowd may cheer, the bells may toll, and the gowns may shimmer in green samite. Yet what do we truly witness? Not a union of love, but a performance of power. The Lady Alianor has spoken words not her own, her tongue pressed into betrayal, her heart locked away, and her future sealed within a gilded cage that gleams brighter than any jewel but cuts deeper than any chain. Roland stands triumphant, but triumph built on submission is as fragile as glass, as hollow as the echo of vows whispered in fear. Sister Margery's sanctimony drips like venom, Bess quivers like a sparrow in a storm, and Hawksmere Keep itself seems to groan beneath the weight of false celebration. Remember this, my confidant. Gold does not soften iron, nor does sanctity purify cruelty. The bars of Alianor's cage glisten, but their bite will bleed her still. And scandal, oh scandal, thrives in such shadows. It clings to whispered prayers, it lingers in candle smoke, it dances at the edge of every vow spoken under duress. So take heed, for not all weddings birth joy, some birth prisons. And in Hawksmere, the vows of chapter 8 will echo not as a blessing, but as a curse.